Welcome to the WNCT Podcast Network.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
It is a crisis that strikes at the very heart and soul and spirit of our national will.
People have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in to this edition of What the Politics. I'm Victoria with Emily here in the digital studio, and today's topic is going to be about the January 6th insurrection. So before we get into that topic, because it's been quite a while since we've really covered anything since then here at WNCT, I'm going to ask our guest to introduce himself.
Good morning. This is Jan Wolf. I'm a reporter covering legal issues for Reuters in DC.
So my first question is insurrection, is that the correct term when it comes to what happened on January 6th?
I think that's a good question that has, been one that politicians and news organizations and the public has really grappled with. I've seen some news organizations feel comfortable calling it an insurrection. I do think that's a somewhat loaded term because, it brings to mind sedition, an attempt to overthrow the US government. And that's a crime under the legal code that hasn't actually been charged yet. Okay. So, when you're saying insurrection, you're, I think, suggesting that is the case. And I think reasonable people can disagree about that. I'll leave it at that. It's not for me to say, but it's, it was a deadly riot. It was, a pretty unprecedented attack. I think, there's no real room for disagreement there.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And let's go ahead and talk about, the players of this event, this situation, whether, you want to call it an insurrection or something else, the people that were involved. They've said Oath Keepers, Trump loyalists, QAnon, Proud Boys. How would you really break down who these people were that were involved in this situation?
The way FBI Director Chris Wray broke it down at a congressional hearing, this was a month or two ago, and which I think is accurate based on my reporting, is you had three general categories of people. In the most extreme, you have some of these far-right organizations you mentioned. They've been alleged to have conspired to attempt to subvert the certification of Biden's victory. And so that's at a high level, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and the 3%ers. And so those are these sort of, far right or militia groups that have been accused of the most serious charges here, conspiracy. Conspiracy is a very, sort of a broad but serious crime under the federal code. Then you have people who aren't accused of conspiring ahead of time, but seem to have gotten swept up in the moment, right? And they engaged in attacks on police, despite many of them in other settings, claiming an admiration for law enforcement. They certainly didn't that day. I mean, the footage really speaks for itself. It's awful. And then you have the people who have been charged or pleaded out to misdemeanors like unlawful picketing. These are people that entered the Capitol grounds. So, that's a crime. It's the people's house, but you go through security, right? You don't just let yourself in. And so, but those are people who, didn't engage in any, they're not accused of engaging in any violence. It's a misdemeanor charge of unlawful picketing, or unlawful parading, rather.
So when it comes to the federal crimes for the people who were rioting, what are some of the repercussions? Like, what would be the sentencing? What are some of what happens when you get accused of a crime and you're found guilty? What happens afterwards?
Right. So now I'll start, from the lesser offenses up. So the unlawful parading charge, we have seen that. We don't have a lot of data, right? We have about 70 guilty pleas at my latest count, but
70?
we only have 70. But so we have about 600 people charged, about 70 guilty pleas. And we only have a few sentencings. I want to say 3, but don't hold me to that. But what we're seeing from these early sentencing is benchmarks that will be used later. And so if you pled out to the lesser charge of just unlawfully entering the building, and you were cooperative with law enforcement and you accepted responsibility, you're not going to prison. I mean, that could change. You know, judges have a lot of discretion here, and they're not bound by the decisions of their colleagues on the bench. But it doesn't look like that's going to result in any kind of jail time. And those people haven't been held pending trial either. If you're in the middle category, that's where we see judges' discretion really kicking in. You know, it's really up to the judge to, you know, evaluate there. But I think we're looking generally in a range of about 6 months to a year if you know, engaged in acts of violence or threats on that day, but not in the context of some coordinated conspiracy. And then when it comes to the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys and 3%ers at the top of the pyramid, well, what we have to go off of is one member of the Oath Keepers pled guilty, and the judge said at his change of plea hearing that he's looking at between like 40 and 50 months. So even though he hasn't been sentenced yet, you know, he's looking at several years behind bars. That's the sentencing guidelines. The judge can go higher or lower, but that gives you a sense of what's going on. And many of those defendants have been held pre-trial. So they're behind bars while they await trial.
Mm-hmm. And what is the highest offense that somebody is being charged with or accused of in this entire case load, I guess you could call it?
Right. So that would be conspiracy. Like there's a general federal statute against conspiring with another person to commit any other offense under the federal criminal code. And that's a recognition of the fact that conspiracies are just inherently more dangerous when two or more people get together to plan and take an overt act in furtherance of that plan. You know, that makes everything much more serious. And so our criminal code reflects that. So it's this general conspiracy charge, conspiring to block the certification of the vote. What we haven't seen yet, despite much speculation about this, is sedition. There's a federal statute against attempting to overthrow the government. That has not been charged. And there was some thought that we might see a murder charge, right? Because Officer Brian Sicknick, a member of the Capitol Police, he died soon after the deadly attack. This actually came to a surprise to some people, but his autopsy came back saying he died of natural causes. I think that made a lot of people say, I don't quite understand. He died of a stroke the next day. You're telling me that's unrelated, to what happened at the Capitol. But that's what the autopsy said. I have to think that the fact that he was being attacked viciously for hours the day before had something to do with him dying of a stroke the next day. But the long and short of it is, as I understand it, that complicates a murder case. It essentially takes any kind of murder theory off the table, including felony murder, which is a crime of, like, let's say a murder happens when you're robbing a bank or something like that. You can be charged with murder under the felony murder statute. So there was some thought we might see that. It's sort of like saying a murder happened because you did another very serious crime. And because of that autopsy, I don't think we're going to see that happen. I think it would have happened by now if it wasn't.
Mm-hmm. And so this might sound kind of like not a dumb question, but I'm just trying to kind of keep everything in check. So people who are being charged, they're kind of being accused of trying to overthrow or thwart like the vote counts or something like that. It's not necessarily having to do with trying to do a coup, like a coup d'etat.
Yeah, the wording in the conspiracy cases is conspiring to block the certification of Congress's work. So it's not conspiracy to overthrow the government.
Okay.
It's conspiracy to block the functionings of Congress.
Okay. Yeah. So that's something that I wasn't really like. I thought it was like sedition, insurrection, like conspiracy to like overthrow Congress. So one of the main characters that was involved that blew up everyone's social media timelines was QAnon shaman. What's going on? First of all, I don't know his name, like his actual name, but what's going on with him? Where is he in this caseload and being charged? Like, what is he being charged with? Where is he? And just kind of catch us up on what happened to him.
His case got a lot of attention. I mean, it obviously began with the costume, and then he also, made some requests and claims that I think got a lot of attention. He said he only wanted to eat organic food, and of course that, I think that drew some laughs. He did a 60 Minutes interview. His mom was on 60 Minutes. And so that's Jacob Chansley. I guess he was born Jacob Angeli. He goes by Jacob Chansley. Everyone knows him as the QAnon shaman, sort of confusing. But he has said that he's a shaman. I don't know much about shamanism, to be honest, but that's why he said he had to eat organic food. He would go to QAnon events around the country for a long time. He at one point said that he thought he should get a pardon from Donald Trump. He just has a history of sort of making outlandish statements, and I think that's why he's gotten a lot of attention. He, according to his lawyer, has mental health problems, and his lawyer did ask for, a mental health evaluation, a competency exam to see if he really is capable of standing trial and, understanding the charges against him, that sort of thing. In the end, he recently accepted a plea deal, and he's looking at a sentence. I want to say it's about 40 months. I need to check that, but it's in that range of like a few years under the sentencing guidelines. And so, his lawyers tried to portray him as more in like that middle category of, or even in the real lesser category of people who just kind of like breached the Capitol, but they weren't violent at all. And the government has painted a different picture of him. He's holding like this projectile. I mean, that's too loaded. The government calls it a spear. His lawyer says it's like a harmless flagpole. He, by going to these QAnon events, prosecutors say that suggests, violent tendencies, because ultimately QAnon is, this absurd conspiracy theory that, Democrats are like this, sinister, group that's, harming children. And so, prosecutors tried to make him look like a threat and a violent man. And he did leave a note. You may have seen the footage of him breaching the Senate chamber. And that's when he left a note for Pence. And say, it was sort of a cryptic message like, we're coming for you. That's not exactly what he said. I don't want to misquote it, but something in that realm. And so I think there's, disagreement really between prosecutors and his defense lawyer about whether this is like a violent guy or, this is just like sort of a harmless, like, guy who likes to dress up.
Definitely. And I think I saw recently that he was actually trying to like denounce QAnon out of his name and kind of revert back to his birth name or given name or chosen name, I guess. So in my mind, I'm thinking, is that because of the legal proceedings going on and it has to do with some sort of liability and he's trying to walk away from that name? Or is it just he's realized, maybe like, hey, I messed up, or maybe this isn't, maybe this isn't the line of work for me, kind of thing?
I think what you're grappling with is exactly what the judge was grappling with, because, on multiple occasions, Chansley sought release from jail. And in that calculus, when somebody hasn't actually been, charged, you have to decide, are they a danger to the community? And so what you look to is whether they've actually tried to make amends and have been apologetic. And, long story short, I think the judge really struggled with this. It's like, are you saying what you need to say now because you think it'll help you, or are you actually contrite? And I do think it's fair to say, I mean, this is what the judge said, that Chansley has been a bit all over the place in terms of his acceptance of responsibility. Is he really contrite, or does he plan to monetize his fame as a QAnon mascot? I mean, that's what the judge called him. So the most recent decision in that case was, having pled out, Chansley wanted to be released while he awaited his sentencing hearing. And the judge said, no, because I'm not convinced that the judge said, I think you're still a danger to the community, basically. So the judge didn't seem to think that, he's being fully contrite here.
And so when it comes to arresting people and my question is, why did it take so long to arrest a lot of the people involved or try to find out who exactly the characters were involved? I mean, I remember weeks after January 6th, March, April, May, seeing people, oh, so-and-so was arrested, so-and-so was arrested. Why did it take so long?
Yeah, so, you know, that's something a lot of people have wondered about, and I think it's been a subject of congressional hearings. The intelligence agencies have basically said, and the Capitol Police have said that, you know, they were overwhelmed, and the footage really speaks for itself. And, you know, I don't think they've gone as far as calling it an intelligence failure, but I don't think there's any dispute that law enforcement was caught off guard, and they never want that to happen again. And ultimately, you know, I think when you're overwhelmed and trying to protect members of Congress, your focus shifts from executing arrests to just trying to, you know, counter violence. And so there were very few arrests that day. And, you know, that led to a very unusual sort of online manhunt in a sense. And it's been interesting to see the crowdsourcing of it. If you read these affidavits from FBI agents, this was crowdsourced. A guy named Ryan Riley, a reporter at the Huffington Post, is actually writing a book about this, about the, you know, the manhunt. That's all really been done through tips, and a lot of people were turned in by friends and family. You know, we've seen families and friendships torn apart here, but you know that's a common dynamic where family members and friends said, you know, we're turning you in. You know, we see that that's you. You know, we see the footage here, and. You know, we've seen even sort of like high school acquaintances, Facebook friends. You know, a lot of people who participated posted on social media afterward. And so other people took screenshots of that before it could be deleted, you know, before there could be a change of heart, and they sent it to the FBI tip line. There were some bad tips too, but, you know, it's been interesting to see how many of these tips did lead to arrests. There were even women in the DC area who, in the immediate aftermath, went on dating apps like Bumble, especially, and they set their filters to conservative or very conservative or whatever, and they started matching with guys who were visiting, and they got some of them to confess to participating in, you know, in the attack, and they took screenshots of that and sent it to the FBI. So it's been pretty remarkable. I haven't seen anything quite like it in law enforcement history.
For sure. And I mean, with people, you know, like you said, a lot of these situations, a lot of these arrests were made because family members, friends on social media and things like that were sending these tips into the FBI. So I know with a lot of crimes, you know, there's statute of limitations with how long something can be pressed. So is there a statute of limitations with these types of crimes or these types of situations, and how long is that?
Yeah. There is a statute of limitations for like pretty much for all criminal offenses, really for the most part, because we don't want evidence to get stale, and you know, at a certain point that starts to be unfair to the defendant. You know, but generally, the statute of limitations for like most criminal offenses is in like you know the 2-year range. So there's still you know a lot of runway here for prosecutors to bring charges.
Mm-hmm. And so the January 6th congressional panel. So explain to people what a congressional panel is, and if there's any sort of disagreements or any sort of, I don't want to say controversy because that's such a loaded term, but if there's any sort of heated arguments happening within that panel.
Yeah, I mean, I think the formation of the commission has been really controversial because there's one procedure that allows for, you know, a bipartisan investigation by outside experts, and that's what we had after 9/11. You know, we had the 9/11 Commission. These were experts from both political parties who wrote a very impressive, like, document that, you know, is now taught in school, like an explanation of what happened. And so I think a lot of people wanted to see that, but you know, long story short, there was a lot of Republican opposition, and they were, you know, and some of which was grounded in opposition to how many Democrats Speaker Pelosi wanted to put on that that form of a commission. So it didn't happen. So what we have now is what's called a select committee, and it's actual members of the U.S. House of Representatives who are on the select committee. And at one point, Kevin McCarthy put forth 5 recommendations for Republicans, and Speaker Nancy Pelosi shot down 2 of them, Jim Jordan and Jim Banks, because she just didn't think, the way she put it, they weren't serious about getting to the bottom of what happened, and they would only throw wrenches in the investigation at every turn. And that Jim Jordan is actually a material witness because he spoke to Trump that day. Or that's the Democrat view. So once Pelosi rejected those 2 picks, McCarthy then pulled all 5 of them, even the 3 that Pelosi said were fine. So then Pelosi picked 2 anti-Trump Republicans, Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney, to be on the committee, because she wanted it to be bipartisan. So it's mostly Democrats, and then it has Cheney and Kinzinger. And these are, members of the House. They're not like outsiders, but they do have an investigative staff, and they do have subpoena power. So, they will get to the bottom of some of what happened. Whether they will get to the bottom of it as well as like a 9/11 type commission, I think there's skepticism of that. But, we'll wait and see. I mean, maybe they'll do a great job. Maybe they won't. We just don't know.
Sure. And I want to get right into former President Donald Trump and kind of, his role or people's idea of his role in this situation, as well as, where he is now and where he might be in the future. A lot of people really don't want him to be able to run for office at all ever again. They want him completely barred from that. But there has been speculation that, he might run in 2024, or he might try for another position in 2024. So what are your thoughts, or where is Donald Trump now, and kind of how did he get to the position he's in right now?
Yeah. So, I mean, where to begin, right? I mean, so in recent weeks, there's been a lot more talk of him running among people close to him, and his hints have become less subtle. So, I mean, we'll wait and see. But I mean, he's essentially saying he's going to run again, and we'll see. There's an argument that he's saying that because it helps with GOP fundraising and it helps keep him in the spotlight, and that there's no harm in flirting with the idea of running, but we'll see. He is free to run for office again. Impeachment was the mechanism to stop him, to disqualify him from running again. That if you're convicted in a Senate impeachment trial, the Senate can bar you from running again. They opted not to do that, so there's that. And he has not been criminally charged in connection with January 6th. In terms of his criminal liability, the likelihood of him facing criminal charges, here's where we're at. So the Manhattan District Attorney, who's a state prosecutor, has a tax fraud case against the Trump organization. Trump is not a defendant in that case. It could happen, though. So that has nothing to do with January 6th and everything to do with his habits as a businessman before he became president. If he's charged, he can still run for office, but I think that would complicate things. The GOP would have to ask themselves if they're okay with that. And state prosecutors in Fulton County in Georgia are investigating whether he tampered with that state's election. You might recall, like, there was audio of him saying to the Secretary of State in Georgia, this election was corrupt, I need you to find me votes. So was that him engaging in protected First Amendment speech, or was that him pressuring an election official and violating the criminal code? So there's that. And then, the DC Attorney General has talked about investigating whether he engaged in criminal incitement. But the DC Attorney General generally doesn't bring criminal cases. So all that to say, I don't expect Donald Trump to be charged in connection with January 6th, based on what I have seen at this point. The First Amendment provides really strong protection to all of us, including the president. And one thing about Donald Trump is that he speaks in sort of vague ways. So for instance, like before January 6th, his tweet said, January 6th, be there, it's going to be wild. Well, what does that mean? You know, it's open to interpretation. The Oath Keepers, according to these indictments, saw it as a call to violence. Other people, you know, might see it differently, and he can plausibly say, you know, I didn't mean to incite, you know, an insurrection. And that's what he said. That was his defense in the impeachment context. And so, you know, I don't expect him to be charged. I don't expect anyone really in his inner circle, from Donald Trump Jr. to Roger Stone to others, to Rudy Giuliani, to be charged just based on what's been reported so far. Of course, that could change. We don't know all the facts, but you know, I think some caution is in order there.
Yeah. So I have one more question for you, Emily. Do you
That's all my questions.
Those are all your questions? Yeah. All right. So my question is it's going to go away from the January 6th topic. You gave us one sentence about who you are, like your background. So kind of just going into legal reporting and what you do. How do you report on a case this big? Like, where do you get, who are your sources? How do you what are your assignments? Yeah. Do you have someone tell you how to report, like a word count, deadline? Just tell us how you're reporting this.
Well, you know, there are some reporters who are on this beat full time, and I suggest following them on Twitter, reading their work. Zoe Tillman of BuzzFeed, I think, really sets the gold standard. Ryan Riley of Huffington Post has also done an amazing job. And, you know, they are every day dialing into multiple court hearings because, you know, we're dealing with more than 600 defendants. And, you know, so every day there's something going on. And, you know, members of the public can listen too if they want. Because of the pandemic, the judges in DC have opened up an audio phone line. You can't see exactly what's happening, but you can hear the audio. And so what I do is I cover these hearings on a near daily basis. I'm writing about other things too. I can't quite make it a full-time beat, but you know, let's say it's about half my workload right now is just writing about these cases as they wind their way through the court system. I went to law school before I became a journalist, so I've always been drawn to legal issues and writing about the law. And you know, in the Trump presidency and in the final weeks of Trump's presidency, there's been no shortage of legal issues to cover. So I've been pretty busy.
Definitely. Well, one more question, I guess, a fun question just to kind of wrap it up. Why not? We're heading into fall. It's starting to get chilly out. Are you one of those people that is like all about the pumpkin spice, all of the fall drinks and all that sort of stuff? Or are you just like, meh, okay.
The pumpkin spice latte, no, but these like pumpkin cream cold brews that they have at Dunkin' and Starbucks. Yeah, with the new cold foam. I don't know if you had that yet, but yeah. I mean, I'm the same. I'll have that in July. It's so good.
There you go. See, I'm the exact same way. Some people are like, absolutely not. Keep that away from me until like, you know, November, but I'm all about it. So
yeah, it's in the 80s every day in DC, so it does seem a bit odd to have it, but I don't judge personally.
There you go. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk with us about such an important topic and such a huge topic, you know, in our country. So thank you so much. And guys, thank you for watching this edition of What the Politics. You guys, those who are listening, we do have a video component, of course, on our website. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you listen or watch your podcast. So thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next episode.